Welcome to Small Town Times. I have some special guests today, a panel discussion. Stu Campaigne from BayToday's here, and Dave Mendicino, former councillor. We're going to talk about what everybody's been talking about for the last week is the unfortunate incident where our MP, Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota, invited a guest, a 98-year-old Second World War II veteran, to listen to the president of Ukraine give a speech to Parliament, and it all went south real quick. A couple days later, when they realized that this veteran was actually volunteered for the SS Nazi unit, the Grenadiers, the Galatia unit, Ukraine used. He was volunteering to fight against the Soviets, who had oppressed his community prior to that, and but that nuance was kind of lost. Once you're volunteering for an SS unit, you're a Nazi apparently, and Speaker of the House Rota had to step down, and it's still an issue as other factors and other players use it as a means to an end to note that the Canadian government doesn't know what it's doing as their message. So, guys, we're going to tackle this from a local angle and a little bit about what we hear is going on the streets. And maybe, Stu, I'm going to throw it right at you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Sure, glad to be here. Well, you know, I think the first thing most people say when we talk about this is, wow, Anthony's a really great guy. You know, and he really is. He's a nice guy. Whether your politics lean left or right or up the center, it is unfortunate. I think you say it wrong. You say it correctly, Dave. I still can't believe it. All these events kind of lined up to happen the way they did. The result is, I don't think there was any way around it after a certain point. I don't think there was any turning back, whether you believe that's right or not. Was there a way to salvage it? In today's political climate, I mean, the other parties really jumped on it fast, and once the Liberals turned their backs on Mr. Rota, really that was it. So, but a shame, and it does bring. There's a little part of me that says it's a shame for North Bay as well, you know, and for our riding. As much as I respect Mr. Rota, it's an international incident that has brought us not into a real favorable light for at least a few days. So,
and Dave?
Well, I mean, Stu said a bunch of stuff. Like it's so unfortunate. A lot of us, most of us, are still in disbelief at how it all played out. Here, Anthony Rota, our MP, was approached by a local family that you know had asked for their father to attend, and you know. So Anthony stood up. He said he's made a mistake. He apologized right off the hop. You know, for me, I keep on going back to process. And my God, is this? It wasn't up. There must be some parliamentary kind of process where they vet these individuals, whoever it is, coming into the chamber, especially when you've got a world leader attending with all the circumstances that brought with it. How could there not have been a proper vetting process? It didn't take long. Sometime Friday, I mean, we started finding out, or it didn't take long for, I think it was a university professor that found out that who he was. Where was the vetting process? I mean, we don't know all the answers. We're sitting here, obviously, we're information is coming in daily almost. And, you know, I've learned a lot over the last week or so myself. But to me, I get back to process. And to me, this happened to Anthony. It didn't happen because of him. The system failed him. And failed everyone in Parliament, every member, and perhaps if the leader had gotten up when all this happened and apologized and said that this has brought to light a fact that our vetting process is outdated, and we need to change it, and we will. Would that have saved Anthony? I don't know, but it's just a shame that he had to follow that process. And it all, obviously, as Stu alluded to, it all became political. And once that happens, unfortunately, there's no second chances.
Yeah, I think the process that was in place was that the Speaker of the House has is separate from the government, so that its guests are its own responsibilities and whatnot. As far as vetting goes, that's as far as I can read. I haven't seen anything that conflicts with that. I also know that I don't think they put a whole lot of forethought into the fact that they were going to point him out and honor him in that way, as far as that seemed to have taken a twist on its own. The family is telling people that they didn't know he was going to be honored like that. They just wanted him to be there because he was, pro-Ukrainian against the Russians, and there was the president of Ukraine, and it's very important to him. I think the actual honoring them snowballed out of nobody was planning to do it. If they were planning to do it, they might have vetted him a little bit more carefully, right? So it was just a matter of maybe cutting some corners, and I think Rota's a big man, and he took responsibility for it all, and that's okay. It's an unfortunate mistake. It's probably no doubt an end to his career politically, and I don't think there's going to be any change to that. Stu, do you have any understanding of the process and where it fell apart, or any other comments on that?
Well, I think it's important to, recognize that when we talk about war that happened 80 years ago, there's lots of gray areas. And I'm not trying to champion any side of any conflict, but there are things that happened that had to happen for certain people. And I'm not excusing anyone's choices, but that's the truth. There are gray areas. Just like Mr. Rota's actions that day, there's probably some gray areas there too, where, I see it kind of like how you guys are saying how it was probably a last minute thing. And I bet you Anthony has had people in the house over and over through his tenure where, maybe he knew them a little better or knew all about them and recognized them. And maybe this was like you said, it could have obviously had something to do with Zelensky's visit. But for anyone to ever say, and I'm political stripes aside, that this was planned, it was malicious, that's just not, I don't even think we can start there. You could tell that moment where he was reading from, one would assume remarks he had written down, but maybe not, maybe a secretary or an assistant. And he kind of looks and says, oh, he fought the Russians. And then that look just came over his face. Like he knew he was finished right then. And that was kind of like, there's this meme I saw online where the Curb Your Enthusiasm music comes on, dun, 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 dun. And that was kind of the look on Anthony's face, like, I'm finished. He knew. And he knew it wasn't quite all adding up. And of course, we all know what happened later that day. So for me right there, that says like, this wasn't like some kind of secret plan to bring the Nazi into the house or anything like that. But I mean, one day maybe we'll hear the story about how this all really happened. Mr. Rota, if he's bored in his retirement, could probably write quite a good book about it. But yeah, I have no idea how this all happens, how a mistake of this magnitude happens. It's quite embarrassing for our government. It's embarrassing for us as Canadians. As accidental as it was, still embarrassing. Yeah, I just don't understand how we went from what could have been a nice moment, or what I think Anthony thought was going to be a nice moment, to a complete catastrophe in like seconds, right in front of our eyes. And that's what we saw.
I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the, Mr. Hunka's situation when he joined up when he was 18 years old in 1943. But Dave, do you have anything to add to as far as the process or what you feel like? One of the questions I want to ask you is like the Conservative government's making hay on this and really trying to make it another thing that Trudeau's at fault for. And like do you see any links there, or how do you feel? You're a conservative, eh?
Well, for me, you mentioned at the beginning of the show you were going to, from a local level.
Yeah.
I think Anthony fell on his sword. I think he realized he had to. I think when Stu, you mentioned while he was giving his speech, there's a moment there that I think he realized. But from a local level, Anthony has a lot of strong support. He's been our MP for, when all is said and done, it's approaching 17, 18 years, give or take. He's served us well. You mentioned his political career was done. Well, I think he had already acknowledged before this that he was not running again. But you know what? If he ran again, I'm not so sure his political career would be done.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I mean, he's beloved locally. He is. He's a nice man that's put in and sacrificed a lot to do what he's been able to do. And I think locally, from what I've been able to see over the last week, people realize that and acknowledge it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be a conservative potential candidate facing Rota in an election, because that's not, you're right, it's probably not a done deal, and people vote with their hearts a lot of times, and sympathy goes a long way. One of the things I was looking at when I was researching this situation and finding, like many people, like I'm wearing my Stand With Ukraine shirt on here, like there's no pretense of not being somewhat biased against the war against Russia that invaded Ukraine this time and many other times, right? But there was a BayToday article a year ago by Linda Holmes. She covered one of the events, and the Hunkas were there. And Mr. Hunka was quoted in that story saying that he actually fought with the Ukrainian resistance against the Russians. And that may be true. We don't know for sure. We do know he volunteered for the SS Waffen when it was created. We do know he fought there. We don't know if he was part of any of the atrocities that actually took part. At 20 years old, when the war was over, I can imagine that he wasn't leading a division or making, wasn't, you can't be a Nazi actually part of the party unless you are German. Ukrainians were not, so he wasn't a part of the Nazi party. He was fighting in his mind against the Russians. But in my reading of the history, there were in 44 major battles against the Soviets, and those who survived them from the 14th Division, actually, some of them did end up volunteering as well with the resistance army of Ukraine that knew that they were going to have to fight the Germans as well when they get out, but they were fighting the Russians. So it's quite possible he was part of the SS Waffen, and it is quite possible that he actually did fight for the underground Ukrainians, like he said. So those two things could be both true, right? So there's a lot of detail there. Whether that changes anybody's mind, I know there's been some people that quoted saying that Mr. Hunka should be, should look into the specifics of his service and exactly what he did, and whether or not he was part of some of the atrocities and the war crimes that have been documented, as well to exonerate him or clarity, right? I'm not sure how that would go. I know there's probably a show of Poland wanting to extradite him for that purpose. I know that in Canada, we went through this process a little bit in the 80s, where there was a commission that looked specifically at the 600 remaining Ukrainian vets who were with the SS Waffen. And they decided that just being a member of them didn't make them a war criminal, right? So I feel that way. If my son joined any army at 18, he's ordered to do things, right? Like he's signing up to be ordered around. So once you're in, there's not a way to actually come back out. So I don't want to judge that person's decision. I want to judge him on his actions. That said, his son Martin Hunka was with the Hospital Foundation on the board. He was chair, I believe, and he immediately stepped down. I believe they received death threats, and the hospital board erased his participation with the board, and the family's in hiding right now. What do you think about that erasure from the hospital board? Stu, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, to me, it could have been handled better. I think, unless he asked them to do it, which then I guess I could see. Mm-hmm. I don't.
It could be.
Could be. But I don't. I think you want to be forthcoming all the time, especially in situations like this. Every time someone thinks you're trying to hide something in one of these situations, it just makes it worse. So what I would have done is said something like, yes, Mr. Hunka's father, there's questions about his wartime service. Martin Hunka has been a loyal part of this board for years. We appreciate his time and his donations to this hospital, and we would gladly stand behind him and have him stay on this board. That's what I would have done. Now, that's a few days after all this happened, so maybe that's a different take. But why are we hiding this guy's family members? Like, why are we trying to pretend like they didn't exist? That part of it really bothers me. I did things when I was 18 that I'm not too proud of. Now, I'm not comparing it to, obviously, things that happened in war, but I always think to attack the problem head on is the best way. And now it just looks like the Hospital Foundation Board, unfortunately, is trying to erase his existence, as we've said, when really what's true is he's been an important part of it for many years.
Any insights, Dave, on that?
So this is all being my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong. This is all. There's going to be an investigation on how this came to happen inside our parliament. My understanding.
Mm-hmm. There's calls for that. I don't know for specifically if they started it, but I imagine there will. Yeah.
So here's a concept. Why don't we let that happen, and then start who's got to resign and who's got to do this and who's got to do that. Anthony obviously felt, and not obviously, he felt a lot of pressure from all sides of the House to resign. You mentioned that the unit that Mr. Hunka was with was they determined that there was no war crimes done. Is that correct? Is that what I heard you say?
No. There's evidence that some members of the 14th Division, which was thousands and thousands of people, did participate in some war crimes. What they decided in the commission in 1980s here in Canada was that just because you were a member of that division didn't make you a war criminal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is that what the family has been carrying all these years? Maybe they did not feel he was a war criminal. The Canada let in 2,000 from similar units in the early 1950s. Mm-hmm. That was, we're talking about all this now, how many years? 70 plus years? In the early 50s, that's like 5-7 years removed from the war. I'm sure that would they have been vetted then? Would they have been allowed to come in? I mean, I don't know.
Here's what I know about that. What I found was that England needed a bunch of guys to work on their farms because after the war they had a lack of workers for their farms. So they brought in the anti-ballistic Soviets. They knew they didn't like Soviets, so that was okay because that's what they were fighting. That's the Cold War, and that came in after. After the Russians were no longer our allies. They brought them into England. They used them for farms for a couple of years, and then they needed to get rid of them, and they told Canada, take these guys, they're okay. That's as much vetting as happened there. That's it. They just said, hey, they don't like the Russians, they don't like unions, Canada, you don't like them either, because at the time Canada was happy to take them because they were against anything that was socialist. That's kind of how it worked. It's not anything to hang our hats on as far as vetting goes, or being proud that the Canada was actually at the time more willing to bring in anti-Russian former SS Waffen members than they were some Jewish people, because some of the Jewish people were leaning towards socialism, they thought, right? So we're guilty of accepting them, but only because they weren't really properly vetted. Nobody knew exactly what these gentlemen did during the war. Nobody wanted to know.
And that may or may not include the family, right?
Yeah, no, the family are certainly, I can only assume that they knew that their Mr. Hunka fought against the Russians for the independence of Ukraine. And I am positive that was in his mind. That's what he states. That's what he said in the different blogs, and that's what he said to the Nugget last year. BayToday last year.
This wasn't a 98-year-old man quarterbacking all this and making this happen. This was his family. This was his son, I would assume. Not assume.
His son did contact Mr. Rota to ask him if he could be in the gallery for that speech.
So I'm sure the son did his own in his head vetting, thinking about it, and no way he would have put his father or anybody in a position like that, I would think.
They didn't even know he was going to have the spotlight on him. So they're hard to speak for them. It's hard to speak for them.
Dave, when you asked to go, and I don't know, did he not know he would be acknowledged in the House?
They, from what I can tell, from what I've heard, fourth hand, is that no, they didn't know he was going to be acknowledged personally.
Okay. See, this is the thing, right? We're talking here, and we're based on what we know. There's so much we don't know, and Stu, you said it. One day, we may find out what.
I would like to have the Hunkas right here to have a chance to tell their own story as well, but I know that they may be advised that's not a good idea. But I would love for them to be able to tell the story themselves and clear some air. They deserve that. Everybody does. Maybe BayToday can do that story.
Yeah, possibly. Other thing is, again, not to discount wartime things, and I'm careful. I don't want to stick my foot in anything with this. It's all very, there's a lot of moving parts, but I think what we're talking about here is like the human side of it, right? For the Hunkas, the reaction they've had, whether founded or not, for Mr. Rota, for Canada as a country, for our riding too. But like, Hunka is not Himmler, right? Like this guy, like I'm not saying we give him a pass, but at what point do we forgive? The guy's 98 years old. He may not even have all his faculties. We don't know. I don't know. But, I think about this often. I'm a bit of a war, history buff, and you never hear a lot about American or Canadian war criminals. And why is that? Because they won the war, right? So, again, not to discount what the atrocities that happened, but I guarantee things that were not above board happened on both sides. And the ones that have been branded as war criminals for being part of a certain unit, or, I want to see proof that anyone has done these things. I want a firsthand account. I want video. I want something. Obviously, video is not possible from 1943 mostly, but before I brand them as a war criminal and try them as a war criminal, there are people who did things on both sides they're not proud of. And all I'm saying is we don't look at them that way because we're on their side, so to speak. And I think this whole thing, it's more about politics and, kind of shaming the Trudeau government than anything else. I don't even think, and it just happens that there's this angle with what's going on in Ukraine, with the Second World War tie-in, and that's all being used to push the agenda that the Trudeau government is incompetent. And you know what? They very well might be, but I don't think this is the way you show it.
And that's what took it to the whole new level, is the politics. Again, this didn't happen because of Anthony. It's not because of him. it's, he made a mistake. Obviously, he acknowledged it. He apologized. His apology was accepted locally, but once it got, in the House of Commons like that, and the politics, as you said, took over, it was a done deal, I think. Unfortunately, it'd be nice to, once all this is investigated, like I said earlier, it would have been nice to look into this. As Stu said, he wants to see some evidence. Mm-hmm. The good reporter that he is, he wants to see some evidence. That would have been nice. Everyone take a pause. Yes, it happened. Yes, it was wrong. And as a leader, I'm going to ensure that the processes are changed to make sure our vetting system or process is 100% foolproof. But let's do this investigation. But and as far as locally, the son, whether he was, he decided to step down from the hospital, again, that's all a shame, really. I mean, it's unfortunate. That family's been around North Bay since the 50s, my understanding.
I think they settled first in Toronto, and Mr. Hunka was a big part of the Ukrainian community there, and then they came up here.
Look at you fact-checking me. That's good.
Well, I'm just...
No, that's good. I'm glad you're doing it.
I did a lot of reading after this started, man, and I don't know it all, and I'm sometimes thinking I'm on precarious ground, even having any sympathy for either of those gentlemen that were involved. And it's a scary time in social media and whatnot to even have a comment. And so it's very brave of Stu to come here as a reporter, because he's got to maintain a higher level of objectivity than I do right now.
But it would have been nice. I don't know. For me, it would have been nice if you could get all the information before the what started, hitting the fan, and everyone's scrambling and everyone's trying to, do the politically, Paul, once that came into play, it just got elevated to another level. And again, my understanding, has the Prime Minister apologized?
Yes, he has.
To the Prime Minister of Ukraine?
Oh, I'm not sure.
I believe he included something to Zelensky, but it was kind of to Canada and to the world stage. And it was about 2 or 3 days after Mr. Rota resigned.
But the media, and I don't know if this is just the media. You guys know better than me, but the media keeps on asking him, have you talked to the president of Ukraine?
Yes.
And expressed and they keep on dodging that question.
I'm sure there's a long list. And after that, they'll have another person that he'll need to apologize to. So, Stu, you were going to say something?
Well, and just to add to that too, I think also what Trudeau has said and what the focus has been on is, let's not give Putin the ammunition to use against Ukraine. As far as we're inviting Nazis into our House of Commons and things like that. That's kind of the part I saw. Mm-hmm. I admittedly don't watch a lot of CPAC, so I should probably watch more than I do. But